Morning, everybody. It is Friday. It is 10:30-ish, and it's time for CEO Chat. My name is Al Cini.
I'm Joe Osmendi.
Joseph.
Absolutely, Al. Good to see you.
Always a pleasure working with you.
We have a great guest today, too.
We have a terrific guest. Her name is Darci Poole, and she's the founder of a company called Outside In Consulting.
Okay.
And what makes this interesting is a kind of a new area in organizational development, which is that the culture of a company and the brand of a company ought to really be the same thing. They should be integrated with each other. Darci, I know that's a passion of yours. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about Outside In Consulting and what makes it different?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Al. So I have a long history, actually, because I founded my company back in 2007. And it started, and I think the name of it is very relevant because that is kind of what makes me unique in this space. A lot of people, when I started my company, it was after I had worked for a large global hotel company as a trainer. I did a lot of work as an internal training consultant and performance improvement consultant working with the brands. So I supported the brands and I helped them roll out various branding initiatives. I was very tied to the marketing and the branding teams. And so as a trainer, I really saw my purpose as being a brand builder. That's what I did. I focused a lot on soft skills, leadership skills, customer service. I taught a class called Building a Service Culture, and this was back in 2000. So pretty early in my career. So I, as a trainer, doing a lot of new employee orientations, doing a lot of new hotel openings. I trained everybody from room attendants and maintenance workers to owners and general managers and directors of sales. So when I was doing my job and training these people, I thought, wow, I'm really a brand ambassador. I'm really trying to impart knowledge about the brand and how to be good stewards of the brand. And for me, that seemed pretty intuitive. I was a brander. And even though I was in HR and I was a trainer, but I recognized that not everybody saw it that way. As a matter of fact, I had a head of one of the brands that I supported for many years say to me, Darci, you're a trainer. What do you know about branding? Go teach your little class. And I was like, wow, maybe you're the one that doesn't know about branding because I'm actually teaching your employees. I say employees because in a franchise organization, you don't have employees,
sure.
Right? You don't have a lot of employees. Most of them are somebody else's employees. You're trying to influence them and you're trying to get them to buy into your brand.
Right.
So anyway, long story longer. I really saw that, I used to work with the brands. I would take everything they knew about the customer. I would pull that information in and say, okay, if that's who you're trying to be, if that's what you're trying to deliver to the customer, if that's what you're trying to be known for, what does that mean internally in terms of how we have to behave, who you hire,
right,
how you recruit? So I would pull that information in, hence the reason I named my company Outside In. Because I believe that the customer is actually at the heart of your business.
Right.
And that you should design around your customer. And that's what I did. So one of the last projects I worked on when I was, and the company I worked with was IHG. But at the time, the last project that I worked on the team that launched our first lifestyle brand, which was Hotel Indigo. And it was super exciting because I got the opportunity to really design the employee experience, the customer experience, develop the brand values and how those would be articulated and interpreted. I developed the new employee orientation. I helped inform our recruiting and hiring strategy for that brand. One of the things that I'm really proud of is when we were recruiting our first general manager for that brand, I kept emphasizing how important it was for the general manager to really get the brand, like get what it stood for, get the personality and the essence of the brand. And so we established a little bit of a different protocol for our hiring for that position. And the person that we hired to open that hotel, and I think it was probably back in 2003, 4, is still the general manager of that hotel.
Really? Wow.
So he did such a phenomenal job of
Wow.
picking the right person for that brand and to head up the first hotel. That she's still there today. And I've actually run into people that have worked for her and said she's the best boss they've ever had.
That is a real success story, and it's reminding me of the reason why we're talking to you today. A brand is not just a logo. A brand is the whole experience a customer has working with a company. It could be a service company, it could be a product manufacturing company.
Absolutely.
That whole experience from the moment you think that company might be able to solve a problem for you to the moment that they actually do. You're going to encounter people, talk to people, the way they talk to you, the way they treat you, all of that is brand.
Absolutely.
Is that right? So now it's interesting, Darci, because there are an awful lot of companies out there wondering how to do what they do when what they do now is totally on Zoom. And there are an awful lot of people, I think, that are struggling with the whole idea of brand ambassadorship on a virtual platform, where they know what to do in a retail store, or they know what to do in a hotel. They don't necessarily know what to do when they get somebody on a virtual Zoom call. Can you help with that?
I mean, it's the same process, really. Like, thinking about how you interact with people is you have to map the experience out. You have to be intentional. You have to design it, right? So you have to think about it. I mean, you know, the Zoom world isn't really different than the online. You know, most companies had to shift over to really going to an online virtual world a long time ago. Retailers,
Right.
hoteliers had to learn how to market themselves and compete in a virtual environment, right? So even companies where, like hotel companies, where you actually, you know, put heads in beds and it's a very personal experience, there's still a lot that happens in terms of attracting those customers in a virtual environment,
Right.
because it's very competitive.
Right.
So I think the interesting thing is marketing, you know, the people who kind of own the brand, that's what they do, is they market, right? They attract, they get people there.
Right.
With a good message. What keeps them there, what makes them loyal, what keeps them coming back is your employees, your culture, right? So we can talk about that relationship and the marriage between brand and culture. But you have to be intentional. You have to be intentional both about brand, you also have to be intentional about culture, which means you have to understand them both and what they are and what value they deliver.
Well.
So it's all about just making that shift into helping define how you want to deliver that experience and who you're trying to attract and who you're trying to be.
Darci, how long is an engagement with your firm if a company wants to deal with that?
So it depends. It depends how they're engaging me. So one of the things we haven't talked about is culture, right? So we've talked about brand. So typically from a brand standpoint, again, it depends on the maturity level of the brand and where they are from a brand standpoint, right? Have they defined their brand? Do they know who they are? What's the challenge they're experiencing with their brand? Are they having a difficult time attracting customers? Are they having a difficult time differentiating themselves? Are they seen as a commodity and therefore they can't command the rates that they'd like to command? So those are all branding issues, right? The other side of it is culture. And if, so a few years ago, and I'll tell you a little bit about how I made that segue sort of from branding to culture.
Great.
Okay.
I was a trainer. And one of the things I realized when I was training people, and I was training soft skills, I was training leadership skills and customer service skills. I realized most of our training environment was, we did regional workshops. So we pulled people in, they flew into a city, and we'd get them together and we'd train them. And I realized that I was teaching people a lot of really good, valuable skills. But if the culture they were going back to didn't support what they learned, it wouldn't stick.
Yeah.
And I thought, gosh, I really was getting a little discouraged and frustrated because I want to make a difference. I want to add value. And when I kind of realized that I wasn't necessarily going to make a dent because I was sending people into an environment that didn't necessarily support what they were learning, and therefore it wouldn't stick, and they would revert back to all of their old behaviors that have been reinforced in their environment. And so that's when I got really interested in culture, and I thought, you know what, if I'm going to make a difference, I need to go bigger. I need to understand culture. I need to understand the environment that's going to make training, brand, whatever it is, successful. So I started doing some research, and I found human synergistics. I started evaluating some of the culture tools that were out there because I wanted a tool to fit in my toolbox. And the culture assessment that I found that I really like is the OCI, the Organizational Culture Index, that Human Synergistics has actually developed. And they developed it about 40 years ago. So there's 40 years of research and validation behind this tool. It's been administered globally to companies of all different industries around the world, and has been proven to be valid in the sense that what they have found is it doesn't matter what industry, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, people universally agree on what a constructive culture is. And so when you talk about brand and you talk about culture, brand to me, a lot of people like to say that culture is that, it's your uniqueness, it's your DNA. I tend to argue a little bit that brand is really your uniqueness. Brand is where you define your personality and define who you want to be.
Right.
Culture is really how you make that happen. Right. And so, and brand is that thing. It's that constant. It's really that thing that you can anchor yourself in. And both brand and culture are going to evolve, but they both have to be managed intentionally and separately. I don't believe that you have someone like, right now you have head of marketing and head of HR that kind of don't talk. They need to talk.
Right.
They need to do those things in tandem, but they are different, and I think they need to be treated differently.
Well, Darci, you're preaching to the choir. This is a great subject. Joe and I are both huge fans of the whole approach. Talking about how you do it, I think we need to take a break. When we come back from the break, though, let's talk about how you choreograph this for a client, how you tailor what you do for hospitality versus healthcare delivery, for example. So we'll be back with more of Darci Poole and Outside In Consulting after these messages.
Stick around.
Number 7. Number 8.
9 regular. Oh, wait. 13 giant. The usual?
Of course. Number 1.
Jersey Mike's, a sub above.
Today's show is sponsored by Dr. Jacqueline. Take charge of your life personally, financially, and professionally. Visit drjacqueline.com to book an appointment today.
Hey everybody, my name is Ralph Graves Jr. I'm the host of the Ralph Graves Jr. Show, and I want to invite you to pick up my book, Unstoppable. I wrote a book called Unstoppable. It's 7 universal laws that will transform how you pursue and achieve success. The one thing that my 20 years of law enforcement has taught me is that no matter who you are, we are all governed by universal laws, like gravity. But in this book, we're going to talk about laws like the law of forgiveness, laws like the law of control, the law of intelligent practice, the law of expectancy. I was able to see how those, no matter what their background was, those who identified and treated these laws with respect, they were able to go on and lead successful lives. So pick up this book, and you can go ahead and pick it up at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, RalphGravesJr.com, where anywhere where fine books are sold. Thank you.
Welcome back to CEO Chat. What was your name again?
I'm Joe Osmendi.
Well, my name is Alcini.
Well, good to see you, Al.
It's nice to see you too, Joe. This is a fun thing to do on a
Absolutely,
Friday.
and we got a great guest today.
It's especially fun when we're talking to somebody like Darci Poole.
Right.
Darci's joining us from Atlanta. She is the founder of Outside In Consulting. We're talking about something we love, which is aligning the promises you make with to your customer on the brand side with the behavior and experience the customer actually has when they do business with you. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Sounds
that
good.
split personality that a lot of companies have, where what you get isn't exactly what you see, is really the problem you solve. And you do it by shaping behavior inside the company. And we were talking a little bit about how you do it. Maybe you can start this segment by explaining to us what the mechanics are. If I were a client and I said, I think I need to up my game on the customer experience side of things, where do you start with me?
So first, understand your brand. So how have you defined your brand to date? So I would typically do an audit. I would work with the marketing team or their agency, if that's the case. But I would collect any information. So normally I would do just a download, right? So I'd find out, what are your customers saying about you? What kind of feedback do you have? How have you defined yourself? Where are the disconnects? What are you promising versus what are they saying they're getting, right? And I would try to identify where those gaps are existing. There's two things, right? One is, can I help you map your brand experience in terms of how the customer is experiencing it? So what are all the various touch points where your customer interacts with you? And how many of those are touch points through technology versus people? Like, what's the people impact on those experiences?
Right.
And what do they know about your brand? So one of the things I have found that companies don't do a very good job of really educating their workforce about the brand. They leave the brand to the customer and the customer relationship, right? So they tell the promises, but they don't tell the employees what promises they've made.
Interesting.
So that's a huge disconnect. So part of that is just, how do we educate employees, and some of that, a lot of that is new employee orientation, right? So how are you educating people and getting people excited about the brand and telling them? Most new employee orientations focus on HR, administrative, benefits.
Right.
And they forget to actually get people excited about the brand and the company that they're going to work for. So
Not to interrupt you, I just recently was reading some statistics on onboarding. For most companies, it's exactly what you said. You point them to their desk, give them a chair, tell them what their phone number is, give them business cards, and maybe you go over their benefits. So it's salary and benefits. But there's so much more to creating an employee who's aligned to and properly prepared to deliver on your brand promise. And that's what you do. I think that is so key.
And that actually, that's a huge miss, both from a brand perspective and a culture perspective, right? Because your first impression of your experience as an employee is huge, and you're starting to draw some conclusions very early on about what success is going to look like in this organization, what behaviors are acceptable and not acceptable. So very early on, you're starting to form an opinion about what it's going to be like to work there. And your new employee orientation and your onboarding experience is a huge contributor both to a positive, healthy culture as well as a positive and healthy brand.
That's really critical. Now in a large company, I think I want to talk a little bit about subcultures, because in a very big company, there will be departments, and each of those departments will have a kind of a culture that supports the larger culture of the company they're in. How do you handle that?
So the cool thing about the assessment that I use is that you can actually segment it out into a variety of different ways. So you can literally assess your culture by age. You can assess it by geography. You can assess it by function. So you can segment it any way you want. So if you think, you can segment it by race, right? Or gender. If you think that you have an issue with gender or race equality, right? You can actually assess your culture based on, how do women feel about their working environment versus men? How do 20-somethings think of it versus, your 50-somethings, right? Your frontline versus your executives. So the great thing about this culture assessment is literally you can break it down and you can figure out where is it out of alignment. The thing to understand is that there may be some things that are more important in your marketing. Creativity in your marketing department is pretty important. Dotting your I's and crossing your T's in finance is really important, right? So there are things that in your role, but the culture itself, how you do that, is pretty consistent. How you're going to get the best out of your finance employees and how you get the best out of your marketing and sales, it still requires the same basic cultural set of values.
Well, that's important. Now, we're talking an awful lot about how a customer perceives a company, but there's also this thing called employee branding. It's how the employees perceive the company too. So when I work with outside-in consulting and I get my brand and culture aligned the way you do it, what does that do for morale? What does that do for retention?
So it should help you attract quality employees. It should help you retain them. The thing about employer brand, right, is again, employer brand, and this is also something that I've observed, is that an employer brand and employer branding is a marketing thing. So what often happens is that you sell the dream and you deliver the nightmare, for lack of a better word, right? It might not be that horrific, but at the end of the day, same thing applies, right? You promise something to the customer, do you deliver it? You promise something to prospective employees, do you deliver it?
Do you deliver that? Right.
And oftentimes the answer is no, because marketers are trying to attract people. So they, put the shiny balls out there. They tell you how great the culture is going to be. Here's the thing about culture. Culture isn't always pretty. Culture can be ugly. There are things, so take, for example, I have a company here, a pretty significant sized company here in Atlanta. A couple of my friends, I've known people that have left there and hated it. I have known people that love it there. I had a consultant once ask me if there was, is there any company you would never do business with as a consultant? And I was like, yeah, I don't think so. And how about you? And he said, and he named this company. He said, I will never do business with this company ever again. And I went, wow. They're a local company. I have a girlfriend of mine who works for them. It's really interesting. Friends of mine have said, Darci, you could never work here. I said, why? They said, you're very direct. Like, you like to get things done, right? You're not going to sugarcoat things. This company, she said, a friend of mine said, let me give you an example. She said, we go into a meeting. I'm doing a status update on a project. She says, I go around the table. I ask everybody, how's the project going? They all answer. They're like, oh, yeah, good, great, blah, blah, blah. She said, we leave the meeting. They all grab me one at a time after the meeting. They start telling me what's wrong with the project and what's not working. She said, that's our culture. So those are the kind of things, like, that's culture, right? Culture isn't just ping pong tables and happy hours and great snacks in the snack bar that are free. Culture is, what do I think is expected of me in this environment that will help me succeed in terms of how I behave, right? What behaviors? And sometimes those behaviors are keep your mouth shut. Don't make waves. Don't disrupt the status quo. Don't tell people what you need to say, what they need to hear, but tell them what they want to hear.
Right.
That's the underbelly of an unhealthy culture, right?
Right.
So I think a lot of people, they talk about culture and they often talk about culture and employee engagement as if they're the same thing.
Right.
And they're not at all. Employee engagement really is that really nice, fun, happy stuff. Culture can be good, but it can also be ugly. And I think that's one of the things, like, this culture assessment can really help you understand, like, what are the underlying assumptions that people have about what's expected of them in order to succeed in this environment. And is that helping or hurting our organizational performance?
Okay, now let me feed that back to you a little bit. It's great. The cultural assessment, first of all, takes something that's normally subjective and makes it an objective exercise, which is a great thing. So there's science behind this. That's sort of number one. And number two, the culture of something like SEAL Team 6 or a police department is going to be a different culture from the culture of a fifth grade classroom or a charter school. You want to make sure that your instrument and your methodology is appropriate to both. It sounds like you've solved that problem.
Yeah, it actually, believe it or not, I would probably say a little bit about the brand, the things that are important, the things that take priority in a charter school versus a police department, right? May vary, but how you get the best out of people is pretty much universally the same, right? I mean, you empower people, you engage people, you ask people for their involvement and their participation. And it doesn't matter what topic. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about policing or if you're talking about teaching. We as human beings, universally, regardless of age, gender, country of origin, we all universally agree on what it is that makes up a healthy and constructive culture.
Wow.
And so it doesn't matter really what industry you're in. It's going to be the same. The answers are going to be the same if you ask them what the ideal culture is. And so that's one of the things that I do is I will diagnose and get an assessment of what your ideal culture is. You define it.
Right.
You tell me, what do you think the ideal culture is that what is it that you think should be expected of people in your work environment?
Wow.
We get the results from that. Then we do an actual. So we administer the actual culture assessment and you identify the gap. You see the gap between where you want to be and where you are. And then you identify what are those cultural levers that we need to pull that will move you from your current culture to your ideal culture. Because your ideal culture is what's going to get you customer loyalty, improved safety, reduced errors, et cetera, et cetera.
This has been a great conversation. We're up at that part of the program where you help companies learn how to walk their talk. I love the work you do, and I love the way you do it. We're at that point now where you look straight into your Zoom camera and tell everybody how to reach you. So Darci Poole, if I want to learn to walk my talk, how do I get a hold of you so you can help me?
Yeah, so you can find my website at outsideinbranding.com, or you can email me at Darci, D-A-R-C-I, at outsideinbranding.com.
Thank you for joining us today
really.
on CEO Chat. What a great CEO Chat this was.
Absolutely. Darci, you were just spot on about culture and brand.
Really, absolutely. I think you nailed it, and people out there that are wondering about their culture could do well to contact you so you can help them with these things in a scientific, kind of an objective way. And Joe Asamendi, another great CEO Chat.
Yeah, good to be here.
Thanks all of you for joining us on this CEO Chat with Darci Poole, and we'll be back again next Friday at 10:30.
Stay safe, enjoy the weekend, and we'll see you next Friday.
Bye now.